A housekeeper is hired to clean a lonely millionaire's mansion. What she restores is more than just a house. Part 1. The Silent House. Nicholas Grant's mansion sat atop a high hill, quietly overlooking the vast ocean below. As the sun set, the last light of the day cast a soft golden hue over the large glass windows, but inside everything remained steeped in silence. 3 years had passed since his wife's death, and for just as long, the house had not echoed with any sound other than the footsteps of the old housekeeper and the creaking doors during windy nights. Nicholas, once a successful millionaire known for his sharp business acumen, was now just a shadow of his former self. Work continued, but joy had long since left him. The rose garden his wife once lovingly tended had withered. Every painting in the house was covered in dust, and the piano, where Amelia, his wife, used to play every morning, stood quietly under a white cloth. Rumor had it that Nicholas couldn't bear the sound of music, as every note, every whisper, brought back memories he desperately tried to bury. But even Nicholas knew that prolonged silence only made the house feel heavier and colder. One morning, as the sunlight crept through the thick curtains, he paused in front of the large window, gazing down at the overgrown garden below. Nicholas, softly but decisively, "Hire someone to clean this place." The housekeeper nodded, and a few days later, Clara Evans stepped into his life, bringing with her melodies Nicholas had forgotten he once loved. Welcome to today's story. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories. Part 2. The Unusual Housekeeper. Clara stepped through the large iron gates of the Grant estate, her eyes lingering on the moss-covered walls and the large windows shrouded in darkness. The house resembled a forgotten castle, trapping memories of the past within its walls. As the housekeeper led her into the grand hall, Clara felt the coldness that seeped into every corner. Sparse light filtered through the heavy curtains, casting long streaks across the polished wooden floor. Housekeeper softly, "You'll be responsible for the living room, the library, and the garden out back. Mr. Grant doesn't like noise, so please keep quiet." Clara nodded gently, but curiosity stirred within her. Why would a wealthy man like Nicholas Grant allow his home to fall into such disrepair? When she stepped into the living room to begin her work, Clara's eyes fell on a large grand piano resting quietly in the corner. Dust covered the keys, and the cloth draped over it had yellowed with age. She hesitated. As a music student, Clara had once dreamed of performing on pianos like this, but that dream had been put on hold when she was forced to leave school due to her family's financial struggles. Unable to resist, Clara carefully pulled the cloth away and sat at the bench. Her fingertips brushed against the keys, and a soft classical melody filled the room, as if awakening the very bricks of the old estate. From the top of the staircase, Nicholas Grant stood silently, his cold gaze fixed on her. "Nicholas," coolly in a low voice, "I don't recall asking you to play the piano." Clara startled, immediately standing up, her eyes flashing with embarrassment. "Clara, I'm sorry, I was just dusting, but—" She smiled faintly. "I couldn't help myself." Nicholas approached the piano, brushing his hand over the dust still lingering on the keys, his eyes distant. "Nicholas, I hired you to clean, not to perform." Clara bowed her head and quickly gathered her belongings, but as she turned to leave the room, she left behind a single remark, her voice soft yet filled with warmth. "Clara, Mr. Grant, sometimes a house needs music too." Nicholas stood motionless in the empty room, listening as the last notes of music faded into silence. Clara's words lingered in his mind far longer than he had anticipated. Part 3. A Gradual Connection. Clara wasn't sure what impression she had left on Nicholas, but from that day on, each time she cleaned the living room, she would sit at the piano and let her fingers gently glide over the keys. She played soft melodies, simple pieces she had learned in music class. Though brief, the music breathed a faint sense of life into the house, which had been submerged in silence for far too long. Nicholas rarely appeared in the living room, but Clara often felt the presence of eyes watching her from afar. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of his reflection in the window, standing on the staircase or behind a slightly ajar door. One late evening, as heavy rain poured down outside, Nicholas returned home earlier than usual. He stepped into the hall, his coat soaked with rain, but his footsteps halted as he heard the sound of the piano drifting from the living room. Clara was playing Clair de Lune, Amelia's favorite piece. The melody flowed gently, as if Amelia's hands themselves had once again touched those very keys. Nicholas didn't enter the room. He remained in the shadows of the hallway, quietly listening. When the piece ended, he left without a word or trace. But that night, the mansion felt a little less cold than usual. The next morning, as Clara dusted the piano in the living room, Nicholas unexpectedly passed by. He paused at the doorway, his gaze briefly settling on the piano before he spoke. Nicholas, his voice low but softer than usual, "If you're going to stay here, at least play something with soul." Clara looked up, surprised but smiling. Clara, gently, "I'll try, sir." Though Nicholas's words seemed distant, Clara understood it as a quiet form of acceptance. He no longer forbade her from touching the piano, nor did he seem displeased by the sound of music filling the house. From that day on, each time Clara played, Nicholas was nearby, even if only from a distance, and with every note it felt as if the emptiness within him was slowly being filled. Part 4. Wounds of the Past. Clara stepped into the Grant Mansion's library as usual, the faint light from the window casting long shadows over the dust-covered bookshelves. Each time she cleaned, her eyes were drawn to a small corner of the desk, where an old wooden box sat untouched. Today, as she rearranged the books, a notebook slipped from her grasp, nudging the box slightly. Curiosity stirred within her. Gently, Clara lifted the lid. Inside lay neatly folded handwritten letters and unfinished music compositions. At the bottom of the box rested a letter from Amelia, Nicholas's late wife, unsent and untouched. Clara sat down, her eyes tracing the soft, elegant strokes of Amelia's handwriting. "My dearest Nicholas, if you're reading this letter, I am likely no longer by your side, but I hope our home remains filled with laughter and music. Don't let the house fall into silence, Nicholas. Keep living, keep loving, and cherish the beauty that still surrounds you." Clara folded the letter carefully, her heart swelling with emotion. Before leaving the library, she placed the box on Nicholas's desk without leaving a note. The next day, as Clara sat by the grand piano playing a soft melody, Nicholas unexpectedly appeared. This time, he didn't linger in the shadows or watch from afar. He entered the living room and sat across from her, silently listening until the music faded. Nicholas, gazing at the piano, his voice warm but distant, "You love music, don't you?" Clara, looking up with a gentle smile, "Music is everything to me, but I had to pause my studies to work here." Nicholas, pensive, his eyes drifting toward the window, "So you chose to clean houses like this one?" Clara, lightly laughing as her fingers danced over the keys, "Music can exist anywhere, as long as someone is willing to listen." Nicholas remained quiet, but a faint glimmer in his eyes betrayed the shift Clara hadn't seen before. As Clara rose to leave, Nicholas stayed behind, his gaze fixed on the piano, lost in memories beginning to resurface. The wooden box still sat on his desk, and Amelia's unsent letter stood as a gentle reminder that this house, in his heart, could still be warmed once more. Part 5. Reviving the House. In the early morning, as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the large glass windows, Clara began her daily routine. But instead of quietly cleaning and leaving, she lingered in the garden at the back of the house. The garden had once been Amelia's pride and joy. Since her passing, it had fallen into neglect. The rose bushes were dry and brittle, vines tangled over the small wooden gate leading to the sea. Carefully, Clara pruned the dead branches, pulled out the weeds, and tended to the few surviving rose plants. Every afternoon after finishing her chores, Clara would sit by the grand piano in the living room, letting her fingers glide gently over the keys. The soft melodies filled the house, breaking through the long-standing silence. Nicholas often stood on the staircase, quietly listening. One autumn afternoon, as Nicholas strolled through the garden, he found Clara sitting on the stone steps, gently tending to a small rose bush she had just replanted. Nicholas, pausing nearby, his gaze softer, "I didn't think this garden could come back to life." Clara, smiling, her hands still busy, They're just flowers, sir. They only need a little care, like people do. Nicholas remained silent. Her words reminded him of Amelia, the woman who had always believed that anything could be revived, even things that seemed long lost. From that day forward, Nicholas no longer avoided Clara. Whenever she played the piano, he often sat in the living room, listening from start to finish. One evening, after Clara stopped playing, Nicholas quietly took a seat across from her, pouring an extra cup of tea and lingering longer than usual. Nicholas, thoughtfully staring at the piano. Amelia used to play that piece every morning. She always said music made the house feel alive. Clara, softly. Music has a way of bringing us back to the things we cherish most. Nicholas nodded, his expression sad but lighter than before. One weekend evening, as Clara prepared to leave, Nicholas unexpectedly spoke. Nicholas. Clara, would you stay for dinner? I think it's been a long time since this house has had a guest for dinner. Surprised, Clara hesitated but agreed. Dinner was warm and quiet, with candlelight flickering softly across the long dining table. Nicholas appeared less cold and distant, revealing instead a reserved but approachable man. After the meal, they sat together on the porch, sipping tea and watching the moonlight shimmer over the distant ocean. The waves gently lapped against the rocky shore, bringing a sense of calm. Clara wrapped a light shawl around her shoulders, holding the warm cup in her hands. Nicholas gazed out at the sea, his eyes distant as if searching for something long gone. Nicholas, suddenly asking, I wonder, how do you always stay so optimistic and cheerful? Life can't have been easy, can it? Clara looked at him in surprise, and Clara, smiling faintly. You're right, life hasn't been easy. I once thought I'd become a pianist, but when my mother fell ill and passed away, I had to leave school to work. But, she glanced up at the stars, I realized that no matter what happens, joy can still be found in the small things, like tending to a garden or playing an old piece of music. Nicholas slowly set his tea down, his gaze drifting toward the sea. Nicholas, his voice warm but laden with emotion. You know, Clara, for the longest time I couldn't step into this room. Clara turned to look at him. The soft glow of the porch light illuminated his face, one that was usually cold and stoic, now etched with exhaustion and deep sorrow. Nicholas, smiling faintly, though his smile carried the weight of grief. Every morning, Amelia used to sit by that piano. She'd play songs I can't even remember the names of. But I remember how she'd close her eyes when she played, as if nothing in the world made her happier than music. Nicholas paused, his eyes drifting to the horizon where the sea met the sky. Nicholas. Then suddenly, she was gone. On a rainy afternoon, it happened so quickly, within hours, I didn't even have time to process it. Clara listened in silence, absorbing each word. Nicholas, his voice tightening, eyes distant. After Amelia passed, this house became terrifyingly empty. I thought losing someone was the worst thing a person could endure, but I was wrong. Nicholas turned to meet Clara's gaze. Nicholas, softly with quiet vulnerability. The worst thing isn't loss. It's living in a house full of memories and feeling the emptiness they leave behind every day. Clara tightened her grip on the teacup, her heart aching at Nicholas's confession. Nicholas, looking up at the starlit sky, his tone somber. I locked my heart away. I thought, if I let everything fall silent, the pain would lessen. But it never does. It just lingers, like a small fire burning quietly each day. Nicholas's gaze stayed fixed on the distant ocean, his expression reflecting the loneliness he had carried for so long. A soft breeze drifted by, carrying the salty scent of the sea, but it couldn't sweep away the weight of his words. Part 5. Healing Wounds. Clara sat quietly beside Nicholas, her gentle eyes watching the man lost in his memories. She felt the weight of his loss in every word he spoke, a pain that even time couldn't erase. Clara, softly, her voice steady but warm. Mr. Grant, I don't think Amelia would want you to live like this. Nicholas turned slightly, surprise flickering in his gaze. Clara, meeting his eyes with sincerity. I never met her, but from the way you speak about her, I can feel how deeply she loved you. Someone who loves like that surely wouldn't want you to drown in sorrow or live as a shadow in this house." Nicholas remained silent, his eyes reflecting the moonlight as if Clara's words had stirred something deep within him. Clara, gently resting her fingers on the piano keys. "Maybe music is the way she still stays with you. And I believe Amelia would want you to be happy, even if she's no longer here." Nicholas closed his eyes, letting Clara's words sink into his heart. After a moment, he opened them, his gaze softer, as though a weight had begun to lift from his shoulders. "Nicholas," his voice low but calmer than before, "do you really believe that?" Clara, smiling, her eyes shimmering. "I'm certain of it. The people we love, they never want to see us suffer. They want us to keep living, to keep loving, and to appreciate the life we still have." Nicholas studied Clara for a long time. In her eyes, he saw the warmth and sincerity he thought he had lost with Amelia's passing. Nicholas, with a faint smile, his tone grateful. "Clara, you seem to understand Amelia better than I do, even though you never met her." Clara, lightly laughing as she began to play a soft tune. "Sometimes people don't need to meet to understand each other's hearts, Mr. Grant." Nicholas fell silent. Beneath the moonlight and the soothing sounds of the ocean, Nicholas realized that this house no longer felt like just a shell of the past. Amelia would always be part of him, but now Clara stood beside him, someone who had stepped into his life with patience, understanding, and quiet strength. Nicholas sighed, but this time, it wasn't the heavy sigh of grief. It was a sigh of relief, as though he was finally stepping out of the shadows and into a new light. Clara, softly, "I think sometimes music is the only way to heal what's been broken." Nicholas nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Nicholas, looking at Clara, his voice sincere. "Clara, when you came here, I realized not everything is lost forever. Some things can be found again, even if not in the way we expect." Clara didn't respond, only offering a quiet, knowing smile. Under the moonlight, surrounded by the gentle hum of the sea, they sat together, two people who had known loss and heartache, but were slowly finding light in each other's presence. Clara set her teacup down, her eyes reflecting understanding and empathy. "Clara, Mr. Grant, sometimes the past is just a part of our lives, but if we hold on to it too tightly, we forget how to live in the present." Nicholas gave a small nod, realizing Clara's presence had not only revived the house, but had also begun to warm the part of his heart he believed had closed forever. "Nicholas," his voice calm and genuine, "thank you, Clara. Because of you, this house isn't silent anymore." Clara, turning to him with a gentle smile, "Sometimes you just need someone to remind you that happiness is still here." As Nicholas gazed out at the sea once more, Clara watched him quietly. In her eyes, he no longer seemed like the distant, unapproachable millionaire she had first met. Nicholas Grant, for all his grief and sorrow, carried a quiet warmth, one he had long hidden away. Clara could see it now, a heart that had endured pain, but still held the capacity for kindness and love. "Mr. Grant isn't as cold as he seems," Clara thought. "He just forgot how to open his heart." The ocean breeze carried the faint scent of roses from the garden, a garden slowly blooming once more, much like the house itself and Nicholas's heart. Part 6, A Dream and a Proposal by the Piano. The autumn days drifted by gently, and the seaside mansion slowly breathed new life. The garden of roses behind the house began to bloom, the living room echoed with piano melodies every afternoon, and dinners were no longer marked by long stretches of silence. Clara continued her work, but she was no longer just a housekeeper. She had become an irreplaceable part of the home. Nicholas, once distant and reserved, now frequently engaged in conversations with Clara, strolling with her in the garden and listening to her play the piano. One afternoon, while Clara was rearranging the books in the library, Nicholas entered, holding a folded document in his hand. "Nicholas," his voice warm and steady, "I contacted the music academy where you used to study. They've agreed to let you continue your unfinished coursework." Clara froze, her hands pausing mid-motion. Clara, surprised, "Mr. Grant, how did you know?" Nicholas, smiling faintly, "I pay attention. You can't hide it. I see it in your eyes every time you play the piano. Clara fell silent, her throat tightening with emotion. Clara, softly, I thought that dream was no longer meant for me. Nicholas, no one should abandon their dreams, Clara. And if someone can bring life back to a forgotten house, they can surely continue pursuing their passion. Clara smiled, tears gently welling in her eyes. That evening, as autumn's chill settled in, Nicholas asked Clara to play a piece in the living room, a small celebration for the revival they had both experienced. Clara sat down at the piano, her fingers lightly pressing the keys. A soft melody filled the warm space, weaving through the quiet corners of the mansion. Nicholas sat nearby, silently listening, his gaze never leaving her. As the final note lingered in the air, Clara looked up to find Nicholas standing beside her, a small velvet box in his hands. Nicholas, softly, his eyes tender as he knelt. Clara, this house has come back to life because of you. And I've found myself again. He slowly opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring that shimmered under the room's soft light. Nicholas, his voice deep but sincere, would you stay here, not as someone working for me, but as someone to help rebuild this place with me? Clara's eyes shifted from the ring to Nicholas's face. Her heart swelled with unexpected joy and disbelief. Clara, smiling softly, her voice catching with emotion. I think I've been here for a long time already. Nicholas smiled as he gently slid the ring onto Clara's finger. The moonlight slipped through the large windows, casting a soft glow over the piano keys, a silent witness to the home's rebirth and the love blossoming within them. Part 7. The Wedding by the Sea. On a radiant spring morning, the Grant mansion shimmered with beauty, adorned with pristine white flowers and warm glowing lights. From the garden behind the house, the gentle sound of waves kissed the shore, blending with the soft piano melodies drifting from the living room. Today was the wedding day of Nicholas Grant and Clara Evans. Along the stretch of beach, rows of small chairs faced the sea. Clara, dressed in a simple yet elegant wedding gown, walked slowly along the path lined with white rose petals, where Nicholas stood waiting. As Clara approached, Nicholas couldn't hide the admiration in his eyes. To him, she was not just the woman who brought life back to his home, but the one who awakened a heart he thought had long been sealed away. The officiant began the ceremony beneath the soft sun and the rhythmic sound of the waves. As Nicholas took Clara's hand, they exchanged vows beneath the vast sky and endless ocean. Nicholas, softly as he slipped the ring onto Clara's finger. Thank you, Clara. Because of you, I have not only found myself again, but rediscovered the love and joy I thought I had lost. Clara, smiling, her eyes glowing with happiness. And because of you, I can continue to pursue the dream I once thought I had to let go of. Applause erupted as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, witnessed by close friends and townsfolk who had become like family. A year later, Clara was no longer the struggling student who had to pause her dreams. With Nicholas's support, she resumed her studies and graduated with honors from the Music Academy. From a humble girl playing piano in the quiet corners of the Grant mansion, Clara had blossomed into a beloved pianist. Her first concert was held at the seaside town, with Nicholas seated in the front row, his proud gaze following every note that flowed from her hands. But Clara's success extended beyond the grand stage. Together with Nicholas, she founded a music center for underprivileged children, kids who shared her passion for music but lacked the means to pursue their dreams. The center was named the Amelia Music House, in honor of Nicholas's late wife, a woman who had loved music deeply and believed in its power to transform lives. Each week, Clara devoted time to teaching the children, while Nicholas often stood outside the classroom, silently listening to the laughter and melodies echoing through the hallways. One late afternoon, as Nicholas and Clara strolled through the blooming rose garden, Nicholas paused, gazing at Clara bathed in the golden glow of the sunset. Nicholas, gently taking Clara's hand, "You know, this house didn't just come back to life because of you. I did too." Clara, resting her head on Nicholas's shoulder softly. "We brought each other back, Nicholas, and I believe this house will continue to nurture dreams for years to come." The soft sound of piano drifted from the living room, weaving through the open window and blending with the ocean breeze. The Grant mansion, once steeped in silence, had become a place of new beginnings and renewed spirits. And as they walked side by side into the fading light, they left behind a house filled with music, warmth, and love, a symbol of resilience, hope, and the beauty of rebirth. Thank you for following our story. How would you rate this tale from 1 to 10? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Your feedback means the world to us. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like, and share this story with others.